She said, "I awakened something she couldn't control, and I couldn't look away. It's mysterious, emotional, and instantly sparks curiosity while hinting at the age gap, slow-burn romance tension." The first time he saw her, it was in a quiet corner of the bookstore, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. He had come to escape the hum of the city, the weight of routine pressing against him, and somehow, amidst the soft rustle of pages and the faint scent of aged paper, she appeared. She wasn't loud or demanding attention. Far from it, but there was a gravity to her presence, a calm assurance that made it impossible for him to look away. She moved with the kind of ease that comes from knowing oneself, tilting her head slightly as her fingers traced the spines of books. Every subtle motion, every quiet gesture, drew his attention like a silent magnet. He noticed the way sunlight fell across her hair, catching strands of silver that glinted in the warm morning light, and the gentle curve of her shoulders under a soft, well-worn sweater. Her movements were deliberate but relaxed, as if she owned the space without needing to assert it. When she finally turned to glance at him, her eyes met his for just a fleeting moment, but long enough to send an unexpected jolt through him. There was curiosity there, but also something quieter, something almost cautious. A smile touched the corner of her lips, subtle, private, and yet it left him unsettled in the most impossible way. He wandered closer, feeling the uneven rhythm of his own heartbeat, as if the world outside had faded, leaving only the two of them in that sunlit aisle. The faint rustle of her scarf as she reached for a book made him lean in slightly, wanting to hear the sound again, to understand its texture, to feel the moment. She turned a page, her fingers brushing the paper lightly, and he noticed the delicate sweep of her movements, an elegance that seemed effortless yet entirely intentional. In that moment, he was aware not just of her beauty, but of the quiet depth behind it, the sense that she had lived and learned and carried experiences that he could only begin to imagine. She spoke then, softly, asking a question about a book he had picked up. Her voice was smooth, warm, and the timbre seemed to resonate inside him. It was a small thing, just a simple comment, but he felt the vibration linger in his chest long after the words had ended. He stumbled through a reply, aware of his own awkwardness, yet somehow it felt natural, like a conversation the universe had arranged just for them. When she walked away, he didn't follow immediately. Instead, he lingered, watching her go, the sunlight catching the edges of her hair one last time before she disappeared into the quiet streets outside. Something had shifted in him, an unexplainable pull, a curiosity that went beyond mere attraction. He couldn't tell if it was desire, admiration, or something deeper entirely, but he knew he wanted to see her again, to understand the gravity of this unexpected encounter. He felt the quiet stirrings of something new awakening inside him, and he realized, almost with a sense of awe, that this was only the beginning. After that first encounter, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her presence lingered in his mind like the faint echo of a melody he hadn't heard in years. He found himself scanning the same streets, the same cafes, hoping for another glimpse, another chance to be near her. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a quiet, insistent pull that he couldn't name, an urge that whispered he needed to know her more. And then, one rainy afternoon, he saw her again, sitting alone at a corner table, a book open before her and a cup of steaming coffee cradled in her hands. He paused by the doorway, the scent of rain mixing with the warmth of roasted coffee beans, and felt the familiar thrum of his heartbeat. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met across the room. There was recognition there, but also a flicker of surprise, as if she, too, had felt the unusual gravity of their first meeting. She offered a small smile, polite yet tinged with something warmer, almost teasing. That simple expression was enough to make him forget the chill outside, the noise of the city, and the passing minutes. He found a reason to approach, a casual question about the book she had tucked open, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. As she responded, he noticed the subtle details he hadn't before. The way her fingers brushed the edge of the table, the small crease of concentration between her brows, the soft lift of her lips when she smiled genuinely. Her voice was calm, soothing, and for the briefest moment, he felt as though the entire world had narrowed to the space between them. Every subtle gesture she made, the tilt of her head, the gentle shrug of her shoulders, spoke volumes he wasn't yet ready to interpret, but that didn't lessen the fascination. She handed him the book after he asked a clumsy question, her fingers brushing his hand lightly. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it left a warmth lingering long after, a small spark that seemed to settle deep inside him. He felt an unfamiliar awareness of her presence, a delicate tension in the space they shared. She seemed conscious of it too, and for a moment he caught a glimpse of vulnerability hidden behind her composed exterior. The conversation lingered, slow and unforced. They exchanged small observations about the world, about life, and about the quiet joys that often went unnoticed. Each word, each glance, added layers to the curiosity that now felt more profound than mere attraction. He noticed her laughter, soft and unexpected, and felt it echo in his chest. She noticed the way he lingered over her words, attentive yet respectful, and allowed a faint, approving nod or smile in return. By the time he left, the rain had eased into a gentle drizzle. He walked home with a quiet thrill coursing through him, replaying every detail, every moment of contact. Each brush of fingers, each fleeting smile, had left an imprint he couldn't shake. Hesitation and curiosity coexisted in a delicate balance. He was drawn to her, but careful, aware that some invisible boundary had been crossed, and yet he longed to cross it further. It was a slow, intoxicating awakening, the start of a connection that neither of them fully understood, but both felt irresistibly. The afternoon sun had begun to dip behind the rooftops, spilling a warm, amber glow through the cafe's wide windows. He found himself sitting across from her again, drawn not by coincidence, but by a quiet insistence he could no longer ignore. There was something about her that invited trust, yet held an air of mystery that made him hesitate. Today, however, the air between them felt different, lighter, yet charged with unspoken possibilities. She spoke first, her voice softer than usual, tinged with a subtle weariness. A conversation had naturally drifted from books and music to life itself. He noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she traced the rim of her coffee cup, a detail she might not have intended him to see. She spoke of the small disappointments, of days that felt heavy despite their ordinary rhythms, of moments of quiet loneliness. And yet, she did not complain. She shared, carefully and openly, with a vulnerability that he felt honored to witness. As she talked, he reached out without thinking, placing a hand near hers on the table. Not quite touching, not quite separate, just close enough that warmth could flow between them. He felt it, the subtle thrum of life in her presence, the unspoken reassurance in her gaze. She caught his eyes, a flicker of acknowledgement passing silently, that she noticed, that she appreciated, that she trusted him enough to reveal this fragment of herself. His own chest tightened, not with desire, but with the intensity of caring, of wanting to protect the soft, unguarded corner of her he was just beginning to glimpse. The cafe around them seemed to fade. The clinking of cups, the murmur of conversations, even the low hum of music softened to a distant echo. All that remained was the quiet exchange of glances, the gentle leaning in to hear her words, the small, meaningful pauses between sentences. At one point, she laughed softly at something trivial, and the sound had a ripple, warm and resonant, as if it belonged only to him. Her eyes sparkled with an honesty he found both comforting and electrifying. When her hand finally brushed his, barely grazing, it lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. He could feel the quiet steadiness in her touch, the subtle pressure of her fingertips against his knuckles. It was enough to ignite a flutter of sensation he hadn't expected, a mingling of curiosity, warmth, and the sweet ache of connection. She drew back almost immediately, as if aware of the moment's weight, but the echo of that touch lingered. As they left the cafe together, walking under the soft glow of streetlights, he realized something profound. This was more than attraction. It was the beginning of trust, of emotional intimacy that moved at its own deliberate pace. He wanted to know her fully, not just the graceful presence the world saw, but the quiet, tender vulnerabilities she allowed only for him. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both understood that something subtle, powerful, and quietly irresistible was awakening between them. By the time they parted, the air was cool, and he could still feel the warmth of her hand hovering in memory. A connection had been forged, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through the delicate dance of attention, care, and shared vulnerability. He walked away with a sense of anticipation, knowing that the threads of their lives had begun to intertwine in ways neither of them could yet name, but both felt in the deepest, quietest part of themselves. It was a rainy evening when he found himself walking beside her under the awning of a small, softly lit street. The city had quieted down, the usual din replaced by the gentle tapping of raindrops against metal and pavement. He could feel the cool dampness in the air, yet beside her, there was a warmth that seemed to draw him in, a quiet gravity that made every step toward her feel inevitable. They walked slowly, their shoulders brushing occasionally, each contact electric in its subtlety. He wanted to speak, to say something that might capture the strange, growing intensity between them, but the words felt inadequate, too simple for the weight of his feelings. She sensed it too. Her glance lingered longer than usual, her lips curving into a private, knowing smile. Then, softly, almost as if confessing a secret to herself, she said, "You've awakened something I can't control." The words hit him like a gentle tremor, shaking him from the careful restraint he had maintained for so long. There was no context, no explanation, only the vulnerability in her tone and the quiet urgency in her eyes. He could feel the tension in his chest, the sudden tightening of his heartbeat, and yet he didn't rush. He let the words settle, let them hover between them like a fragile promise waiting to be acknowledged. As they continued to walk, the rain drumming softly around them, he noticed every small detail. The way her hair clung slightly to her neck, the soft curve of her jaw as she looked up at him, the delicate warmth radiating from her as if the cool air could never touch her presence. Every movement, every glance, carried layers of meaning that were unspoken yet undeniable. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching his, and he realized she was waiting, not for an answer, but for him to simply understand, to feel the same quiet, irresistible pull. He wanted to reach for her hand, to hold it and ground himself in the reality of her closeness, but hesitated. The moment felt too delicate to risk, too raw to be spoken aloud. So instead, he mirrored her subtle movements, matching her pace, letting their shoulders brush again in a quiet, electric rhythm. The silence between them was not empty. It was charged, alive, full of the things they could not yet say. For a long moment, they walked like that, two people bound by curiosity, desire, and the tender restraint of unspoken feelings. He realized that this was more than fascination. It was recognition, a spark of something deep and profound that neither of them could fully control. And as the rain began to lighten, she looked up at him again, a fleeting vulnerability flashing in her eyes, and he understood that her confession was both a warning and an invitation. By the time they reached the edge of the street where they would part ways, the air was still wet with rain, but between them, there was a quiet warmth that neither wanted to let go. Her words echoed in his mind, something I can't control. He didn't need to ask what it meant. The ache in his chest, the magnetic pull toward her, said it all. That night, as he watched her walk away under the soft glow of streetlights, he felt the first undeniable stirrings of a connection that was growing too powerful, too profound to ignore, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same. The days after that rainy evening felt heavier than usual. Every memory of her, the brush of her hand, the warmth in her voice, the intensity in her eyes, played over in his mind like a quiet, insistent echo. He tried to convince himself that it was just fascination, a passing moment of intrigue, but deep down he knew it was something more. Something he had no right to pursue, no words strong enough to justify, and yet he could not stop the pull he felt toward her. He began to hesitate. He avoided the cafes where they had met, wandered other streets, and immersed himself in work and routine, hoping that distance would lessen the ache of her presence. But nothing could erase the memory of her soft smile, the subtle tilt of her head when she was thinking, or the way her laugh had caught in the quiet air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Every attempt to focus elsewhere only made the longing sharper, the internal conflict more unbearable. It wasn't just him who noticed the change. She reached out, ever so slightly, in small gestures, a lingering glance in the bookstore, a faint smile when their paths crossed, the warmth of her voice in casual conversation. Yet he pulled back, careful not to give in, even though every fiber of his being wanted to lean into her presence. The tension between them grew like a taut string, invisible but undeniable, charged with feelings neither could fully name or control. He wrestled with the reasons he should stay away. There was the age difference, of course, the world's expectations pressing down like an invisible weight. There was also the fear of misreading her intentions, of stepping too close and shattering the delicate balance they had created. But behind these rational fears, there was something less tangible, an ache, a hunger for connection he could not suppress. Every quiet memory of her touch, the subtle warmth of her hand, the fleeting brush of her shoulder, haunted him with a persistent, gentle insistence. Late at night, he replayed the moments they had shared, each small smile and lingering glance. The faint touch of her fingers as she handed him a book, the warmth that lingered long after, the vulnerability she had allowed him to witness. All of it made him question his own restraint. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance, yet the part of him that feared consequences kept him rooted in hesitation. It was a push and pull so sharp it left him dizzy, caught between desire and propriety, longing and restraint. Meanwhile, she seemed to sense the retreat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her composed expression. Yet she did not press, only waited, patient but quietly yearning. And in that waiting, he realized that she, too, was navigating her own internal conflict, wanting closeness, yet cautious of the power that such intimacy could awaken. By the time they crossed paths again, there was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken battle within both of them. He understood that the journey ahead would not be simple, that their connection would demand patience, courage, and vulnerability. And yet, even in the face of restraint, even while pulling away, he knew with a certainty that unsettled him. He could not stop thinking of her, could not stop being drawn to her, and could not deny the growing truth that she had become indispensable to the quiet stirrings of his heart. It started with a quiet evening, the kind that seemed designed for confession without words. He had found himself helping her carry a stack of papers back to her apartment after a sudden rainstorm had soaked them through. The air was thick with the smell of wet stone and lingering rain, and every time she brushed past him, he felt the gentle warmth of her coat against his arm. Their hands accidentally met several times as they adjusted the load together, and each touch left a quiet, resonant warmth that neither wanted to acknowledge aloud. The walk up the narrow stairs to her apartment was slow, deliberate. He noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight hesitation in her step, as if she too felt the delicate charge in the space between them. When they reached her door, he set down the papers and hesitated, unsure if he should leave or linger. She looked at him then, eyes searching his, and for a fleeting moment, the quiet vulnerability in her expression stripped away the wall she had so carefully maintained. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying more than just gratitude. There was relief, a hint of trust, and something deeper, an invitation that he felt like a pulse against his chest. He didn't speak, only nodded, letting his presence convey what words could not. Slowly, he reached out and touched her hand, fingers brushing hers with gentle intention. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand remained warm and steady, a small, silent acknowledgement that she welcomed the closeness. The intimacy was subtle, electric, and safe. He felt the quiet thrum of connection in her warmth, the subtle rise and fall of her breath as their hands lingered. Every glance between them held meaning. Every small smile carried the weight of unspoken understanding. In that moment, he realized that this was more than fascination, more than desire. It was trust, it was emotional surrender, it was the beginning of something profound and enduring. They moved inside, sharing the soft glow of her living room lights, the subtle scent of her home wrapping around them like a gentle cocoon. He noticed the little details, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her shoulders softened when she leaned slightly toward him, the quiet steadiness in her voice when she spoke. Each gesture, each nuance deepened the intimacy, weaving a quiet, emotional connection that had been building since their first meeting. At one point, he reached again, brushing her hand along the edge of hers, letting his fingers linger on the back of her hand. She responded with a gentle squeeze, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken bond that had been forming for weeks. Their closeness wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, tender, and profoundly human. He could feel her heartbeat against his fingertips, and it mirrored the quiet flutter in his own chest. By the end of the evening, the distance between them had dissolved. Not completely, not abruptly, but enough that they could sit side by side on the couch, shoulders touching lightly, sharing smiles, laughter, and lingering glances. For the first time, the tension of hesitation had begun to ease, replaced by a sense of warmth, trust, and possibility. They had crossed the first emotional barrier together, and in that crossing, both felt the undeniable truth. They were no longer just drawn to each other. They were beginning to belong in small, tender, unforgettable ways.